Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2012 political thriller titled The Company You Keep. Now, The Company You Keep runs for 2 hours and 5 minutes long. It is directed by Robert Redford. In fact, it has Robert Redford's handprints written pretty much all over it. Alright, it is produced by Nicolas Chautier, Robert Redford, and Bill Holderman. The script was written by Lem Dobbs. It is based on the novel The Company You Keep by Neil Gordon. The score was done by Cliff Martinez. The cinematography was done by Adriano Goldman. And the editing was done by Mark Day. And it features an all-star cast, pretty much a lot of big names in the Hollywood industry, Oscar winners, Golden Globe winners, nominees, you name it. They're pretty much all jam-packed into there. Some of them are playing really prominent roles, and some of them are playing roles that are just way below their actual talents. But the cast, we have quite an ensemble here for you folks. Alright, we have, this is a big shopping list. Alright, we have Robert Redford, we have Shia LeBoeuf, Julie Christie, Susan Sarandon, Jackie Evancho, Brendan Gleeson, Brit Marling, Anna Kendrick, Terence Howard, Richard Jenkins, we have Nick Nolte, Chris Cooper, we have big old Sam Elliott doing his big old Burley, Texas accent. Yeah, he's the same guy who does the Ram commercials. Yeah, he's in it. Let's see, we also have Stephen Root, Stanley Tucci, and Keegan Connor Tracy. I just love doing my Sam Elliott impersonation. Everybody loves it when I do that. I don't know why, but, hey, I have thousands of voices. But my purpose on this channel is not to do voices. My channel is to vent out the reviews that I see and to take the time to state my opinions, whether you agree or disagree. Just as long as you respect my opinions, every bit as much as I will be more than happy to respect your opinions. Okay, so just keep that all in mind. So, even though Robert Redford's acting career spans pretty much close to over 6 decades, Robert Redford has only managed to garner 2 Academy Awards. That's kind of sad. I mean, I guess that kind of just makes him off as being one of the more underrated talents in the Hollywood industry. For a guy who's been in the acting profession for almost 60 years, he's only been getting 2 Oscar nominees. I take pity for the poor guy. And that makes matters worse is that none of these were for his acting performances. He won the Oscar back in 1981 for Best Directing in the movie Ordinary People. And the second win he had was in 2002, which to me was kind of like one of those, congratulations, you've stuck around long enough to receive this prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award. It's just kind of a way for like saying, congratulations, you stuck around for as long as you can, and it leaves me no choice but to arbitrarily give you this wonderful plaque for your wonderful contributions in the film and acting community. Almost similar to like, please don't go anywhere, stick around long enough, we don't want you to go anytime soon type of award. It's a consolation prize, let's face it. A Lifetime Achievement Award is just a consolation prize. I mean, when you think about it, Alfred Hitchcock has directed a whole slew full of mystery thrillers, and he has never gotten any accolades for his directing. But hey, he got a Lifetime Achievement Award just for sticking around long enough. That's basically the gist of getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. You stick around long enough, you do some high esteemed movies, you pour out your performances, but you're deprived of Oscars. But because you've been there as long as you have, they just give it to you. Sucks, really. It's just an indication saying you're old, your days are numbered, you're not going to be around for long. Let's give it to you. The closest credit he ever got in terms of acting, well, he did get a Best Actor nomination for the 1973 movie The Sting. But with this movie, The Company You Keep, in which Robert Redford both stars and directs here, the chances of him receiving any Oscars, either for his acting or for his directing, sadly, are pretty much slim to none. I'm not saying this movie was entirely bad, but it still is not Oscar worthy in any way, shape, or form. In many ways, to get a first impression on career goals, you sort of have to start from the bottom. And this is actually where we are first introduced to the character Ben Shepherd, played by Shia LaBeouf. He is a young journalist who works for a newspaper outlet in Albany, New York, the Albany Sun-Times, where he'll go through great lengths to please his editor, Ray Fuller, played by Stanley Tucci. Hey, can Robert Redford pick stars out of the hat or what? The story commences as we are introduced to Sharon Solars, played by Susan Sarandon, whom, back in the late 60s, early 1970s, she was a member of an infamous group called the Weathermen Underground, and has been under investigation since then, as she made the FBI's most wanted list. For those of you who don't know too much about the Weathermen Underground, even I can't really say I know a whole lot about them. I'm probably only just going to go through the icing on the cake. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, during the time of the Vietnam War, there were a vigilante group of anti Vietnam War protesters who used to go around ravaging, destroying property, doing all kinds of other radical activities, and sometimes they might even go through doing things that they would end up probably regretting later in life. And and I think it's just these guys, they could almost be labeled as maybe what you would say terrorists doing things for a good cause. Of course, hey, the Vietnam War, of course, anything that deals with war, there is no winners. There is only losers. Nobody wins in a war. And in a war, you can come home in one of two ways. You can come home a hero, or you can come home in a box. Well, the Weathermen Underground, well, they were notorious for trying to do anything they can to protest against the Vietnam War, and they were pretty much a destructive force in doing this cause. They were definitely pro-liberal, anti-war, And maybe they might even border in terms of what could be defined as fascists. The radicals. They're going to do anything they can to set their messages, to get their messages across, and to set their messages straight, even if it means destroying property, destroying equipment, even trying to get away with murder, in which, in this case, Sharon Solars decides that, she decided that enough is enough. So one fine morning, she packs her kids' lunches, sends them off to school, and then she goes to a gas station to pump some gas into her car. Then all of a sudden, the FBI shows up and she gets under arrest. And 35 years later, she decides to surrender. I guess she just got simply sick and tired of running from the law, so she decides that she just grew tired of running. So that's kind of like what her story is. Alright, 35 years later, she's under arrest, which leaves our inquisitive minded young reporter Ben's wondering, how did they find out after so many years? An associate of hers um, is an attorney by the name of Jim Grant slash Nick Sloan, played by Robert Redford, was going to defend her in court, but he rebuffs the request, saying that he's too busy and feels that he's just simply not up to this kind of case. Of course, we all know that Jim Grant was, of course, a former member of the Weathermen, and that he is probably just as guilty as Sharon. And for many years, he's been hiding from the FBI, going by an assumed name, um, hiding out in small town Albany, New York. Well, Albany, New York is not really that small of a place. Its population is about 300,000. So, small city life. Um, he lives in the suburbs. He's got an 11-year-old daughter, which I don't have too much of an issue. But to see a 78-year-old man being a father to an 11-year-old seems kind of a bit odd. I mean, he looks like he could be old enough to be her grandfather. Or maybe even her great grandfather. Come on. The guy's kind of long in the face. Now, I'm not saying I'm a spring chicken either, but Robert Redford really does look his age. But then again, he was part of an organization in the late 60s, early 70s. But I'm going to get back a little bit more on that. Of course, he realizes that he is now eventually, because, the FBI might be closing in on Jim Grant slash Nick Sloan. He realizes that him hiding out or hiding from the FBI is soon going to be non-optional. He eventually has to go on the run himself. He has to go on some hiding places, not just from the press, which is Ben, which I kind of find also a little bit borderline creepy, because sometimes I think this Ben Shepherd guy kind of gives me the impression that he kind of makes me feel like he's a bit of a stalker. I mean, it seems like I mean, I gotta give Ben some credit for being resilient, but at the same time, I also kind of somehow get the suspicion he kind of makes me think he's a stalker. It's like it's like I would be like lying down in my bed, and he would still grill me and interrogate me with these hardline questions. Like I probably want to have some fucking peace, and he's there bothering me. That's kind of the impression I kind of get from this Ben character. And if it's not Ben he's running away from, of course, it's obviously the FBI, which are hot on his trail. And if he tries to go in on the Sharon Solar's case, chances are they're going to catch on to him. But then you gotta sometimes come to the realization of when is it when is the running gonna have to stop? Sooner or later, he's gonna have to surrender, just like what Sharon did. When word caught on to Ben, he stops by Jim's place to ask questions about it. After all, any attorney would shop at the opportunity for a case like this, so why does he refuse? Jim tells Ben that it's much harder for one to understand. Things have changed drastically since his wife died, and now he has to keep his eye on his young daughter. But Ben does not bite into his excuse one bit. So, for his protection, Ben takes his daughter to her uncle's house to look after him, while Jim is now on the run, not just from the press, but from the FBI. And then we come to ask the question is, when does the running stop? Just saying. After going into further research into the Weatherman Underground, Ben discovers that it's just a ruse to get another member of the Weatherman Underground out of hiding so that they could be on the run until they're proved innocent. This puts Ben in an awkward disposition as he questions his moral ethics as a journalist, as he's caught in the middle of whether to rat on a former weatherman or not to keep this aging man in hiding. Okay. Now, like I said, I mean, I know this is basically a political thriller. And I know that there's going to be a lot of on the run stuff. Because it's a political thriller, there's not too much violence. There's no deaths or body counts and all that. It's basically, just trying to get your man ascertained as to whether or not he was in on the murder of the security guard, set up by the Weatherman Underground. And, there's other Weatherman Underground members who were in on this. I mean, we also had, Nick Nolte's character, Richard Jenkins' character as a professor. We have, of course, Susan Sarandon, Nick Nolte. They're all former Weathermen associates of Jim Grant / Nick Sloan. And, they've spent many years on the run. But, I guess it was time for Mr. Grant / Sloan to come clean to the FBI. Maybe the running just has to come somewhere to a close. Obviously, he's not getting any younger, you can tell. And secondly, he's just you know, just not really up to this whole running from the FBI type of thing. He just needs to stop running and come clean. That's basically the bottom line. The last time, Robert Redford both starred and directed a film at one time was the 2007 film Lions for Lambs, which he co starred with Meryl Streep and Tom Cruise. So it comes to no surprise that he really knows where to gather his talent pool. But the thing is that kind of irks me a bit is that he has this whole slew full of talented performers, but they're playing roles that could be fit for more lesser known talent. And their roles are very, very small and are not, well, I'm not saying that they don't have any terms of importance, but they're just not on for very long. And their roles are very limited. I'm not saying that they lack importance, but they're not really on for very long. And I think maybe it would have made more sense for him to get lesser, lower prolific performers to play some of these parts. I'm just saying. I'm not saying they did a bad job. I mean, Susan Sarandon was good in her role, but she's not on for very long. I mean, I could say the same for Nick Nolte. I could say the same for oh, I don't know, Brendan Gleeson. I could say the same thing for Chris Cooper. I could say the same for Stanley Tucci. It would have made more sense to get some more lesser known performers and put them in these kind of roles. Anybody could have played the roles that they were in. It's not like they were. It didn't seem like it was that laborious for these type of high prolific talented actors to play roles that seem to undermine their real talents. Here, Redford pulls once again an ensemble of very talented performers with the likes of Anna Kendrick, Nick Nolte, Sam Elliott, Richard Jenkins, Chris Cooper, and Julie Christie. And even though they play their roles brilliantly, it's the main flaw comes from the script, and it holds this film shy of greatness. Although the story looks into a moment in history that's rarely examined, we don't. I mean, it's very unusual that we often have a movie that focuses on the Weathermen. It lacks in terms of anything that I would qualify as being impulsive. I kind of understand why Robert Redford chose to be in on this project. I mean, obviously Robert Redford is a strong liberal Democrat, and the Weathermen Underground were probably one of the most notorious liberal-minded radicals in the late 60s, early 70s. Obviously, they did not like they did not approve of President Nixon and him just throwing inexperienced people to Vietnam War, because at one time, if you were a high school graduate, you had either a choice of two options. Either you go and continue your education in university, or you go to war, fight for your country. Sitting on your ass doing shit all is not optional. That was just the way how Nixon used to think. That was his ideology. Well, the Weathermen Underground, they were against all the stuff that Nixon stood for. And therefore, they would protest. I mean, they would ravage any area, creating their own form of chaos. And yes, there have been reports that they even went as far as to what they thought was going to be a peaceful protest against Vietnam. They turned it all into one big radical measure, which eventually led to the death of a security guard. It's this book that this movie was adapted from by Neil Gordon was actually based on actual real events. And I probably would have liked to know a little bit more about that. Go into more better details. But instead, we end up having what is to be more like an intellectually inclined cat and mouse chase between this former radical on the run. That's what it eventually turns out to be. It tries its best to be intellectual, but then it lowers its intellectual potential by turning into a cat and mouse chase. That's where the biggest red herring comes from. I'm not saying it's entirely to the fault of Robert Redford. I'm not saying it's to the fault of the performers. They all did their best. But it was the script that really let me down. Maybe it didn't let others down, but it let me down. The movie is loosely based off of the novel by Neil Gordon of the same title. Not only that, but the film's backdrop is within the realm of the political intrigue. Redford digs movies that definitely have a strong political vibe to it. I mean, just think of the movie All the President's Men. Definitely when he and Dustin Hoffman, I mean, were, newspaper journalists digging dirt into, the whole Watergate scandal with President Nixon. Redford has always had this strong chokehold on the liberal balances. And yes, this movie is definitely liberal bias. No question about it. But sadly, the story also loses its spark as we see an aging old man taking constant trips to the bathroom, and for a 2 hour film, it does drag on like that for way too long. Also, I also do find that Robert Redford might be even long in the face, maybe a little bit too long in the face. For a movie like this to work, we should actually have some aging performers. Okay, I could see Susan Sarandon. I mean, she was pretty much in her late 60s. She seemed more inclined as being a weatherman. Richard Jenkins as the professor in, I think, political sciences. He also was pretty convincing age wise. Um, Maybe even possibly Julie Christie, who looks like she could have been, who looks like she was just a last minute call in. I think maybe probably this was more of a role a little bit more suited to uber liberal minded performer like Jane Fonda. But still, I still think Julie Christie did a fine performance here. Um, she kind of looks the age. But then, one can argue that, plastic surgery still kind of makes her look like she's in her 40s when really she's like in her early 70s, at least at the time in this movie. But Robert Redford, even back in the late 60s, early 70s, he was born in 1936. When you think of the Weathermen Underground, most of these guys at the time were in their early to mid 20s. Back in 1968, 69, Robert Redford was kind of more in his mid 30s. And here he just looks like way too old to have even been a weatherman. And he just was not convincing. And, I'm not here to put him down about his age. I mean, I'm not going to be young forever either. And, and I'm probably old compared to a lot of people. But at the same time, I just think that he just looks really, really aging here. I'm just saying. And I don't need to see scenes of him constantly going to the bathroom every 5 minutes. It has no reason or no purpose in this movie. And there are times when it just kind of irks me that it drags on for as long as it has. If you're going to make this movie 2 hours plus, at least give it some teeth, not dentures. If there was really any performance that stood out, it has to come from the performance of Shia LaBeouf. Whether you like the guy or whether you hate the guy, I actually thought his role really, really stood out above everyone else. Um, Annoying, yeah, okay. He could come across as being a bit annoying. He could come across as being a bit of a stalker. But hey, this guy wants to make it big in the world of journalism. And I'm not just being biased because of the fact that, I'm a journalist too, and he's a journalist, and we're kind of pretty much on the same cloth, and we make our bread and butter by annoying people, by asking questions and getting feedback to our superiors. I've been doing this now for almost 13 years. But at least, I got to admit, the guy is playing a believable role as a go getter. Even he'll just go even out of state to find this guy's hideout. This guy is pretty much all over the place, trying to get his scoop, trying to get his way into the field of journalism, and going through all kinds of great lengths. And I got to admit, he was pretty effective. It doesn't matter whether you like the guy or whether you hate the guy. A lot of people don't like him. But I got to admit, he was pretty damn good. If you give a person the right script, they can do all kinds of wonderful, amazing things with it. He really turned out a role that was more intelligent than his previous ones, which shows that given a proper role, one that he could chop at, he can show that he does have talent. And I'm not saying that the others have displayed good talent here. Even Robert Redford himself was pretty good in his role. I have no complaints about his performance. If there was a real weak character, I guess I would have to turn, and I'm sorry I have to say this, but Nick Nolte was the weakest here. I guess you can say that his voice sounds like his dentures were on too tight, were too loose. Because there were times when he used to slur his lines, like, What are you saying? You're talking like you drank a like you drank a container of syrup and now your lips are pretty much stuck together. That's the way you're talking right now, sir. I'm sorry, Mr. Nolte, but you were the weakest of the bunch. Not to be putting down a person of their age, but I think Redford should have either just directed it, the movie, or acted. I don't think multitasking was the right move for him. There's no need for that. And seeing that he's in the twilight of his life, I think he just needs to slow down a bit. I mean, even as we speak, he's 81 years old. I'm not saying that he should go into some retirement farm if he wants to continue to perform and direct till till he's buried in his grave. Let him do so. Maybe this is his lifeline that keeps him living. But I do think that at a person his age, he needs to slow down a bit. Even though he may have a few moments of great dialogue, his role was disappointing in terms that he lacked charisma. He was effective, but he wasn't electrifying. Considering that this film is strong in its political sentiments, which it is, the film does lack in terms of offering something with an impact. It doesn't have that punch to it. Unlike unlike all the President's Men, that one had punch. Every The three main performers really gave it their all, and that was includes, Robert Redford. That included Dustin Hoffman. That included Jason Robards. They they got deep, they got down, and they did it with gusto. They did it effectively. Here, we had everything it could to be a much more effective movie, but it just didn't have that punch to it. And it all just relegated down to just a bona fide cat and mouse chase between some former radical being on the run from the FBI. I mean, I'm glad that they didn't have anything like over the top car chases or explosions or a massive body count. I thought that was kind of effective. We don't necessarily have to have a thriller where 30 people have guns and they go and then and then we have cars and their screeching tires. No, you don't need to worry about that. There's none of that. But I still think that this movie needed more effectiveness in its performances. And that's kind of where it lacks. It just doesn't have that moment of really getting in your face. I don't know if it was done deliberately, but I don't really think it was intended to be deliberate that it lacked in punch. I wanted to know more about this Weatherman Underground organization, which was an illicit group that strongly opposed the Vietnam War and went to extreme liberal measures to get their message across, even if it costed them their freedom or their reputation. We just never given much insight on this film, as it depended on human drama with overlong scenes that had little to offer the story. So, I know I ranted a little bit too much on this movie, but, like I said, it was just mediocre at best. I don't think it was going to be Oscar worthy like all the President's Men, but, and it's not that I didn't care about the characters, I did. Maybe I cared about them too much, which is where the weakness came. I mean, most of the characters were pretty sympathetic, but they just weren't very impactful. And it's a shame. Now, I know I may have ranted a little bit too much, but I did find some good qualities. But it seems that it's kind of very much equally balanced with the goods and the bads. And so for that, I have to give The Company You Keep a 6 out of 10. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember, be kind, be courteous, and don't be rude. Now we'll be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Correct Writer saying keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.